Thanks everyone for joining us at the Competitive Advantage Talks presented by Kager, also known as the Craft Analytics Group. My name is Arsh Arora. I'm an MBA student at MIT Sloan. It is my pleasure to introduce the presentation, Digging In, Bringing Volleyball Stats and Analytics to the Public. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Michael Bowie, creator of InPredictable.com and co-creator of Evolve.net, to the stage. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. Can you guys hear me? All right. So I'm here to talk to you about what we've built at Evolve.net. So before I get started, I just want to highlight one of the co-creators of what we've created here. Aaron Barzilai is around, so he's in the front row there. I'm probably going to run out of time. I've got a ton of stuff I'd love to talk about in 20 minutes to do it. So anything we don't get a chance to in the Q&A, seek me out, seek Aaron out. We'd love to chat. So, but about a year and a half ago, we started a website, Evolve.net. The QR code will take you to the site. And just wanted to share with you kind of how we came to this and some of a peek behind the curtain of some of the analytics we've built and just trying to better understand the sport from a stats and quantitative analyst perspective. So, and one of the reasons we looked to start this is, one, we saw there was an opportunity to build something that just really didn't exist, but volleyball is a fast-growing sport. Relative to 2019, cumulative attendance in NCAA Division I up 33%. I'm not sure if any of you saw in 2023, they set the single game attendance record. They played a volleyball match at Nebraska's football stadium, over 92,000 attendees. It's also a growing sport just from a television perspective. So ESPN has had great success the past couple of years airing the tournament. The final match has been on ABC the past couple of years. Ratings are up. There was a fantastic match. If you saw it, semifinals, Penn State came back from probably about like 250 to 1 in-game odds to beat Nebraska and then went on to win the championship later that week. In addition to just viewership that's growing, it's also just growing on a professional basis as well. So like a lot of the audience and focus right now is still on the collegiate side, but there are 3 and soon to be 4 professional leagues with professional volleyball in the United States. And to complement that, there has been a lot of great public analytic work, both on the team and the player side. So Ken Massey ratings, there's a thing called Pablo ratings, a lot of really interesting player level work. You can seek out Chad Gordon's volleydork.com website. And Scott Powers has done some fantastic work at Rice University on player evaluation. But we did see an opportunity. There just really wasn't like a one-stop shop to kind of pull all this together and be a user-friendly site for volleyball stats and analytics. So, and kind of the model we were looking to build on was what you think about with men's college basketball, KenPom, or Her Hoop Stats for either the WNBA or women's college basketball. So we can be mentioned along those 2 great sites. I think we'd be doing our job. And this is the homepage right there, and the QR code. We'll also have it at the end of the presentation as well. That will take you to the site. So if you go to our homepage, you'll see it starts with the team ratings. I've created a lot of team ratings. I've done sports analytics on non-volleyball sports for about 10 years, created team ratings for a lot of different sports. People like team ratings. People hate team ratings if you're disrespecting their team, but people engage with team ratings. So when you go to our site, that's the first thing you'll see. And what I wanted to cover next is how we went about building a team rating for NCAA Women's Division I volleyball. So what we want to do is see what worked for other sports. We don't have to do this from scratch, but a few things we were following. One is you want to make it predictive. It's really easy to tell you who won. There's lots of ratings and polls out there that'll tell you that, but the interesting question obviously is figuring out who is going to win. What are the key measures of success? How can you tell who the truly good teams are versus the bad teams? As part of that, I think this is a lesson learned across all sports. Win-loss records are noisy. Focus on something that's more fundamental to team performance, so things like efficiency, and we have more on that later in the presentation. So we've started with NCAA Women's Division I volleyball. Strength of schedule is going to matter, obviously. We've got 350 plus teams, a huge disparity in talent across the various conferences and teams. Fortunately, this is a solved problem in sports analytics, so we can apply pretty standard techniques to account for quality of opponent. And then finally, just back test, back test, back test. This is not us like trying to simulate a volleyball game or how we think it's played. Everything here is just driven by the data, like what actually predicts what is success in college volleyball. So how to define efficiency in volleyball? So this is well understood, I think, in other sports. So basketball, it's possessions, and you can divide it by points per possession. In football, you can define things on a play level, and so either yards per play, or if you want to get fancier, expected points added per play. But with volleyball, the goal is actually to win 3 sets before your opponent does. To win sets, you need to win points. And so the kind of the fundamental atomic unit of a volleyball game is the point. And so where we've defined efficiency, pretty straightforward, is just what percentage of points do you win? So that's actually kind of drives like the bulk of the rating, and that's going to get you like 80–85% there if you just understand what percentage of points a team wins and then understand their quality of opponent. But there's also other things that affect the outcome of a volleyball game. Of course, there's home court advantage. And does home court advantage exist in volleyball? Of course it does. It exists in pretty much every sport you can find. And what we found is home teams win about 51% of their points, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it really doesn't take a big difference in point probability in order to translate into a much bigger probability of winning a game. So 51% of points won translates to about winning games about 59% of the time at home. That's actually a little stronger than what we see in a lot of sports these days. So women's college basketball, NBA, I think more in the mid-50s, but home court advantage is still going pretty strong in college volleyball. And this is used also to adjust stats. So if a team's skewed home and away, you want to factor that into their efficiency ranking, then also in predicting the outcome of future games. And just some other components of the model. So this is just some of the recipe that's behind it. It's not a super complex model, but we really wanted to focus on the key elements of what drives success in college volleyball. So one would be previous season performance. So one game into the season, you cannot create a power ranking based on just one game. So we have to borrow data from the prior season. And what we found is that is more predictive the more roster continuity a team has. So if they've lost a lot of players to graduation or to the transfer portal, we're going to trust that prior season ranking less. If they have a lot of continuity going from one year to the next, we're going to treat that with a lot more credibility. But ultimately, what we're really trying to figure out is how are teams doing now? So by the time you get like 15 games or so into the season, everything is just based on current season performance, and we've thrown out the prior season. Like with other sports, rest matters. So you see this in a lot of sports like NBA. But what we found is if you're playing on the second game of a back-to-back and your opponent has at least 1 day of rest, other things being equal, you're going to win about 46% of the time. So that's about like half the disadvantage you get as just being a road team. And then finally, a model choice we made was just on recency. So we don't weight more recent games within a season more heavily than, say, early season games. It's something we're going to take a closer look at in the off season, but in general, what I've seen across a lot of sports is early season games are more predictive than I think people want to give them credit for, and you can kind of get too volatile of a model just trying to chase more recent trends. You're essentially kind of degrading your sample size by downweighting some of the early season games. All right, this is a pet peeve of mine, but when you're creating metrics across sports analytics or even my day job as an actuary, have your metric mean something so you can actually explain it in a single sentence in plain English what this actually means, as opposed to just some disembodied number that is unclear what's a good or a bad number. So the eval rating, I'm just going to read it verbatim here, is the percent of points a team would win, expected to win, against an average Division I opponent on a neutral court. So the number 1 ranked team in our model last year for most of the season was Pittsburgh. Their evolve rating was 67.3, which means they have a 67.3% chance of winning a game against an average Division I opponent. And that's a lot. As I alluded to earlier, it doesn't take a whole lot of difference in the probability of winning a point to translate to a big difference in winning a game. So at 60%, if you have a 60% chance of winning any given point, you're virtually guaranteed 99% to win the game. So I think this tells you just how strong a team like Pitt is, where they are virtually guaranteed to beat any average Division I opponent. And then one thing we did add on our Vol rating is essentially trying to split it out into components. So splitting rating into offense and defense is a little difficult for volleyball. There is offense and defense, but it's kind of within a point. It's a little hard to disentangle. But this is the closest I think we can come to like an offensive-defensive split that you would see in, say, like an NBA or a college basketball team rating. So as I mentioned before, Evolve is 67.3 rating for Pitt, and it's 62% for serve and 72% for receive. And that is not unique to Pitt. So pretty much every team is at a disadvantage when they serve. So you're less likely to win a point when you're serving than when you're receiving. That surprised me going into this sport because I'm familiar with tennis where it's just the opposite. But in a nutshell, the reason for that is when you're serving, you're giving your opponent the first opportunity to get an attack at the net. And that is just a really strong advantage. So if you imagine tennis and you have the opportunity to hit the ball 3 times on your side of the court, before sending it over, you would just set yourself up for an overhead smash every single time. That's kind of how volleyball works if things are going well, what's known as in-system. So that was the team rating we put together, but we wanted to see if we can kind of dig a bit deeper and like understand the kind of the fundamental components of the sport and what really drives victory. And what we tried to do was essentially build on the 4 factors of basketball developed by Dean Oliver and come up with what are the corresponding 4 factors or whatever number they may be for volleyball. So this is a really interesting exercise. I'm going to share with you a couple approaches that we went to. I think we've aligned on the second approach. If anybody has votes on which one they prefer, we'd love to hear it. But I'll just wanted to share with you some of our thought process. So some of the things we're just keeping in mind. One, you want to make sure that your various factors, so in basketball it's shooting, field goal shooting, free throws, turnovers, and rebounds. And those are all kind of separate elements of the game. And so you want that similar type of dynamic for any kind of approach you're building here. Probably the most important thing is, do they actually predict winning? Is it actually kind of differentiate the good versus the bad teams? And you want to make sure it's built on publicly available metrics. So our first approach was kind of modeling off of the basketball 4 factors, which basically are based on how a possession ends. So we decided, okay, what are the different ways a point can end, and can we organize what teams do at that level? So in volleyball, there's a lot of different ways a point can end, but what we've kind of organized them to are, one, they can end at the very beginning with a service ace or service error. They can end with a kill, which is a successful attack at the net that your opponent can't return. They can end with a block, which is when you block your opponent's attack at the net and it goes back on their side of the court and they aren't able to return it. And then there's rally errors. There's a lot of different rally errors, but the most common one would just be hitting the ball out of bounds. So you want to make sure these are relevant factors. So here's actually how points end and how frequently they end. So you can see that it's kills out of the most frequent outcome of how a point ends, and that'll show up in later analysis as well. But we felt we had kind of critical mass across these 5 factors that were all, they happen often enough that this is a good way of organizing how a point ends in volleyball. But the most important thing is, like, how do they actually predict winning? There are a lot of different ways you can do this. You can get fancy with regressions, win probability added. This is a really simple way of looking at it, which is just, if you only knew how a team did on one factor, how well does that tell you whether they won the game? And so you can see kills are the most important factor when predicting team performance in volleyball. If you win the kill battle, you're going to win the game 83% of the time. And on the other side, if you win the service error battle, if you have fewer service errors than your opponent, you're going to win about 57% of the time. And so this was an attempt, so I'm way more familiar with basketball. I'm relatively new to the sport of volleyball and trying to just understand like how they, the analogous factors and how they line up. And my analogy breaks down after about the second factor here, but I think the first one really holds, which is shooting is the most important factor in basketball. and that corresponds to kills in volleyball, and they have similar importance in terms of predicting winning. If you win the effective field goal percentage battle in basketball, you're going to win 80+% of the time. Same thing with volleyball. So in basketball, if that's a make or miss league, in volleyball, it's kill or be killed. So that was approach number one, and we thought it was a useful way to just organize like what teams do, what they do well, what they don't. But as we kind of started talking through it more, we kind of realized we were not really capturing everything when it comes to how a volleyball game is played. So the second approach we took was more looking at how a point evolves rather than just how it ends. And there's a great diagram here. So this is Scott Powers I mentioned before, but this is a schematic of how a point evolves in volleyball and how it goes from one side of the team's net to another. So you start with the serve. The first touch after opponent serves to you is the reception, and then it goes possession by possession, set attack, and then a dig is coming off of your opponent's attack. So this is a good framework to build out our second approach to building 4 factors for volleyball. So the way we organized it for our approach number 2, one is just how well do you serve, and this is actually just kind of like chronologically through the life cycle of a point. So first, how well do you serve? Do you have a lot of aces? Do you have a lot of errors? Measuring that in a very consistent way. Second is how well do you convert your digs and receptions to attacks? So digs and receptions are the first touch you get after an opponent serve or an opponent attack. And how well do you set yourself up for an attack after that? And then once you get to the attack, how well do you hit? How well do you attack? And so that's the third factor that we're measuring. So we'll just go through the progression here. So the first volleyball value, serve. So that's pretty straightforward. The second is what's called serve-receive. So serve-receive in volleyball is that first possession you get after you receive the serve. And I think a really important insight we had with the help of others is essentially splitting performance out between that first possession serve-receive and what's known as transition. The serve-receive possession is structured a lot differently. It's just a bit more structured, whereas in transition, which are all the possessions that happen after that first possession, it can be a bit more chaotic, a bit more dynamic. And so it measures different types of skills at a team level. And then finally, how do you get from a dig to an attack? So if you don't even get from a dig to an attack, that's going to hurt you in this metric. And then once again, this only matters if it predicts winning. So what we found, similar to kills, is how well you hit, how well you kill are very important. And even on its own, so just on serve-receive hitting, if you do better than that your opponent, you're going to win 83% of the time. If you do better than your opponent on transition hitting, you're going to win about 82% of the time. Then you can see the other 2 factors are important, just not nearly as important as hitting. So I probably have to glide through the next slides here as well, but one thing we added to evolve.net for the 2024 season is player level stats. And this is where I think we've got a lot of opportunity to grow from here. But one thing we do have is just a one-stop shop for the traditional box score stats, that they're searchable, clickable, and just put together in a user-friendly way. One thing we have added is, we call this advanced stats, but sometimes advanced stats is just finding the right denominator. And so in this case, what we're essentially trying to get to is a better denominator for volleyball stats. The default is on a per set basis, so measuring players' attacks, kills, digs, what have you, on a per set basis. But that's still not granular enough in a lot of cases because not all players play every single point in a set. So we have a way to identify which players are on court versus on court and then convert their stats to a per 50 basis in the same way that you would see like per 36 or something in basketball. And another thing I'm really excited to build upon is taking that framework we built of like who's on court versus on court, and are there player metrics you can build out similar in the vein of on-off stats in basketball or hockey. The challenge, though, is unique to volleyball. There are some positions where the player is essentially on the court the whole time. So oftentimes your setter or your outside hitter is going to just rotate through all the 6 rotations and be off the court very infrequently. So it's difficult to measure their impact on versus off court. But there is additional lens we can look at with volleyball. And don't have time to go into detail, but the rotation rules of volleyball, sometimes a player's in the front row, they're in the back row, and there are different rules as what they can do. So even a player that is on court the whole time, you can measure how they do, how their team does in the front row, when they're in the front row versus when they're in the back row. All right. And yeah, like I said, we've added a lot of player level stats. We're really excited to build upon this in the next season. But the QR code there is, again, I will take you to the site. And we have a lot of feature enhancements we're looking to build out for the coming seasons. But yeah, and I think it's time for Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Mike. We have about 5 minutes for Q&A. Just raise your hand and I'll come to you. Right.
I was wondering, do you look at when attacks don't lead to an instant kill, but could lead to the other team being out of system, and maybe that leads to more errors or more blocks for the other team?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's one thing. I think we have it in the site right now is, yeah, essentially how the opposing team does on an attack by a player. So like maybe they returned it, but maybe they got a bad attack as a result because it was difficult to return.
Did you have any issues with data integrity? Because I'm assuming, these kind of stats are probably taken down by someone who's, at the game kind of thing.
That's a really difficult challenge, particularly in the NCAA, 350 plus teams. The data is not always great quality. You're doing name matching and names don't always match. So you have to build a lot of redundancies and checks and rechecks and just to make sure everything's kind of coming together correctly. So that was probably the biggest challenge. That's the story, I think, of most sports analytics. You spend 70% of your time if you're lucky, data cleaning and 20% doing the fun stuff. So.
In a volleyball rotation, when you have the setter, there's usually the two people that are stronger are like around the setter, like the middle and the left side. So those two players would have a disadvantage since they don't have right side help as often in the front row. Is there a way to adjust for that since they have maybe a harder time because the setter won't have as many options by playing in the front row more of the setter?
If I'm assuming you're asking from an analytic perspective, that's definitely something we can look at. So we are able to track which position each player is at any given point, and so we can kind of tease out some of those dynamics I think you're calling out, like where certain types of rotations lead to disadvantages for teams.
If you run a 6-2, you won't have that problem. Or if your setter's like my kid, can hit it just as well as she sets. Can you take the stuff out of Huddle and put it into this? Do you know what Huddle is?
I do.
Okay.
But not right now. No, everything we use right now is just from NCAA.com. So
We can do one more question, unfortunately.
With Athletes Unlimited, actually, we do scoring, but on a per player basis on the professional side. So I'm curious if you've looked at, like I see you have the team scoring, have you looked at individual rankings?
That is on our list. Like we've got some building blocks for some stats to like get a better measure of player performance, but what we haven't really put together yet is kind of more of an all-in-one view. Particularly challenging in college just because you've got to account for opponent strength and things like that.
Actually, we can do one last.
Hey, thanks. It sounds like you're measuring over time and modeling over time, if I get that correctly. And I'm just wondering how much variation are you seeing in, say, the top teams in those indices over the course of a season? And is that something that you're actively involved in trying to understand and model?
Like how team strength varies throughout the course of a season?
Yeah, individual or team, yeah.
I would say we looked at it more at a team level. It's, I'd say it's fairly stable. It may probably similar to other sports where a good team you can kind of identify fairly early in the season, and there'll be some variation, but it's the top teams, I think, at close to the beginning of the ranking were the top teams towards the end of the season as well. So.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mike. That's all the time we have.